So this is a preparation video similar to what I've done or done with prior classes. The preparation video is not to teach you the class, but it is hopefully to help direct you to become as best prepared as possible. So I always remind people it's kind of like we're on a tour together, and it's important that we're all kind of there on time, and we've got all of our snacks and everything ready, and you know, if we needed assistance like a cane, we have that with us so that we could all enjoy the tour of a city together. So this is just going to help prepare you to take that tour with me when we do the that ruffled serged pillow class. This is the sample that you saw a picture of on our website, but I wanted to point out to you the fabrics, where they're put, and the different notions that you really should have with you to be successful with the class. As I mentioned to you during classes, those of you that have had me before, it's really important to get everything prepared and packed up and ready at least the night before the class, not the day of, because you're gonna forget your power cord, you're gonna forget your foot control, you're gonna forget a presser foot. It's gonna happen because it's happened to me. And I guess over time I just learned I just have to prepare the night before, and I make a little checklist, and like Santa, I check it twice. So then this is the project. What we're going to be learning is how to flat lock in a piece of lace. There are two fabrics that comprise this pillow. The accent fabric, which is this piece here, and the main bodied fabric, which you're seeing is what the ruffles are made out of, the base of the pillow is made out of, and the backing of the pillow is made out of. So your main fabric is going to be the most yardage, if you will. And in the instructions that come with the course, I do give you the cutting directions and all. So again, two fabrics, one that is the main, one that is the base. And just to kind of further bring this point home, you'll see that this is a cutaway section of our pillow. So it's kind of like dissection class. What you have here is, again, the two accent pieces, and there's actually a third piece, and the third piece is used as a backing fabric. You're seeing the wrong side here. This is the right side. So that's why you have the three cuts of the accent fabric with the lace, and then everything else is the base fabric. You'll note that in the directions I mentioned getting a thread that is going to coordinate with the main fabric. And in this particular project, what I did is I used this color for my fabric, mind you. And the setup here is you're going to need 4 of these cones of thread to do the construction work. So just a neutral color, it's going to blend in with most of the main fabric is what you're going after. Now, if you look close here, what you're going to also see is there is a rolled, or I should say a narrow hem on each of these little ruffles. And if you look close, you're going to see there are 2 different colors that alternate. And what I recommended is to get something similar to like a Maxi Lock Stretch, for instance. Another brand name is like a woolly nylon. And these are the colors that I used in my pillow. Not huge differences, kind of in the same value range, if you will. But I wanted to point out the difference between regular serger thread and the woolly nylon. And so what I have here, let me just get something that's going to be a little more contrasting. What I have here is this is regular serger thread, and this is this Maxi Lock Stretch, or the woolly nylon. What you're going to see is that when you compare regular serger thread to the stretch thread, it's like air in here. It's a thicker thread. It works beautifully in the upper looper, and it gives you a fuller fill of a rolled edge or narrow hem with your projects. I also use this if I'm doing a lot of sewing like with Lycra. It has a little more stretch to it, hence the name. So that's the purpose of the stretch thread. It is to make those rolled edges. Another component that we want to see with our serger is the different presser feet, and there are some that are kind of optional but good to know exist. And let me show you a couple of these. One of them is a clear foot, and I love the clear foot because it's clear. I can see exactly where I'm going. The one thing I will say is if you are serging on anything that is kind of waterproof, like a wax cotton, a leather, a plethora, a plastic foot tends to stick a little bit more, in my opinion, from my experience, than say a metal foot. And Baby Lock actually has another foot out, which is also lovely, and this is an open toe foot. And that open toe foot I like because it has these red marks for the needles, where the needles are, and it really helps you line up. Like if I'm doing cover stitch, for instance, or anything like serging, and I'm trying to line my needle specifically with a component of the project, like say for instance the edge of a ruffle, just saying, these marks really help me find my mark, my guidance. And this type of foot, the metal foot, I find rides a little bit better over those waxed or waterproofed vinyl-y types of fabric. So just something to keep in mind. These are lovely feet, but not essential. Let me show you some feet that I find more essential for this project and for today's, in our class when we see each other. One of them is a cording or a piping foot. I love this foot for so many reasons. Of course, to make piping, which we have in our pillow, we'll talk about that in a bit, but also to put in zippers with a serger. Oh yes, you can. And so we're going to learn how to do both piping as well as the zipper insertion in our class. The magic of this is the groove that runs into the back side of this foot. So this is a magical foot, and if this is not in your arsenal, I would highly recommend go to your shop, and our shop where we teach these classes is Steve Sohn back in King of Prussia. Go to the shop and pick up this foot because there's so many applications for it. Some of you are coming to the class with machines that are not dual personality. In other words, you might be coming in with, say, a beautiful Imagine serger or an Enlighten. Those are serger-only machines. Some of you will be coming in with the combination machines, which is really what this project is geared for. Those that have serger-only machines, you will absolutely have a sewing machine set up in the class with a neutral color thread in the machine for your use for doing some of the things that we're going to be doing with the cover stitch. But those of you that are blessed with the dual machines, such as the Evolution or the Evolve, or the more modern ones or recent ones, shall I say, the Ovation and the Fabulous Triumph, love that machine. This is really an essential foot. I love this foot. This is a cover stitch foot, and if you look at that compared to a regular girth on a dual function machine, like this is the piping foot coming back into view, but this is how wide the foot is, like on your general purpose foot, which you do 90% of your techniques on with the serger. But look how narrower this foot is. This is fabulous for getting into tight spaces, for doing necklines, all those applications, such as, oh gosh, doing top stitching with a zipper, for a zipper, which is what I will show you in class. I love, 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 love this cover stitch because it's half the width of this. It left the serger part of the foot off of its profile, which makes it one of those must-have feet in my personal opinion. Last but certainly not least is a lace application foot, and regardless if you have a serger only Baby Lock machine or a dual function cover stitch serger, the lace foot is absolutely available for either, and this foot you really do want to have. It has a guide on the front where I can line up my lace and my base fabric. I'll show you how this works in class. It's an adjustable foot. How do I know there's a screw on the front of this? So the lace application foot is another foot absolutely to have in your arsenal. So as far as other supplies to have, the directions call for having a zipper. And the zipper itself is going to be, we want like an 18-inch or longer zipper. You can always make a zipper shorter, you just can't make it longer. And so one thing you might elect to do is you can certainly get like an all-purpose zipper. There's no harm in that. In fact, I use these all the time. But you want at least, you know, like an 18, 20, more like 22-inch zipper. You really want it longer because it allows you to work with the serger a little bit easier when we're doing insertion techniques. So this you would cut down to size. I'll show you how that's done in class, but this is one option. Another option, and this is something I use all the time. If you've never used this, by all means, we're going to talk about this in class, but it's one of these make a zipper type of things. It's zippers on a roll, and you literally cut the length you want, pull the zippers that you don't need back onto the roll here, cut the zipper, and then you have just one pull on your zipper. And these come in a variety of colors. And I just think this was certainly genius, whoever thought of that. It's almost as good as Post-it notes as far as the geniusness of it. Piping. On this project, we're looking at getting piping that is approximately 5/32, a quarter of an inch or less in essence. The important thing with this is you've got to have piping that's relatively flexible. This is cotton piping, and I would highly recommend that. You see how easily this is to flex. There are other pipes out there, or cords out there that are for other types of applications that are a little stiffer. And we're going to actually be turning a corner on our project with this. So it is essential that this is very malleable, very flexible, and it needs to be of the type that it can easily ride in that groove of our piping foot when we have it on our serger. So the piping is important, and the right type, of course. The project is calling for a pillow form that is roughly 14, 16 inches, something along that lines there. And the pillow forms, you can certainly get these pre-made ones. You can also get just like stuffing. You know, you might have fabric scraps or like batting at home that you're not using. You can certainly stuff your pillow with that as well. So I like the pre-made form. Again, the project was a 14-inch square pillow form, to be clear. And so that's a lovely thing to have as well. With the lace you're going to want for this project something that is going to be approximately 1 to 1.5 inches, you know, or a little wider. Certainly not too much more narrow than that, because you really want to see, once again, let me grab this. You want to see the base layer fabric, or the accent fabric, I should say. You want to be able to see that through the lace. So if you have a really narrow lace, it'll give you a different look. And I'm not saying that it's incorrect. It's just I personally prefer a wider window so I can fully appreciate what's underneath there. A lace with a header is really important. This particular lace, it does have a header, but it's not really a straight header. And what I did on this is a pretty good quality lace, is I actually went through, I'm going to grab my pair of scissors and let me just snip some of this. What I actually did is, and I'm going to get a background a little bit better for you. What I actually did is I cut off the lace right about here. So I'm making it a little bit narrower, but even more important, do you see how this edge is kind of scalloped? This is not the header that we want. We want it really to be more straight. This is a pretty good quality lace. It's not nylon, it's made out of like a cotton. And what I can do with something like this is I can actually take my scissor and I can cut right along the edge of that, like so, to make that more straight so that when I insert that into my lace foot, I get a better chance with my flat locking of catching all of this. Notice that this is not fraying, so this is a nice quality lace. And again, if you notice, I did use a pair of scissors to trim that as opposed to, say, a rotary cutter. What's going to happen is if you use a rotary cutter and you've got your rotary cut ruler, let me see if I've got one here really quick. If you use your rotary cut ruler, what oftentimes happens is you get a little of this peeking the other way. And we're not cutting yards and yards of this. The actual finished piece with this is going to be roughly 22 inches. So you could try doing that, but I'm finding that the scissor gives me a little more accuracy. And what I don't want to have happen is some of that to peek out, because then if I use the rotary cutter, I'm not quite on the mark that I need to be. So just a thought. You know, speaking of these machines that are the dual function machines, the Coverstitch and Serger, such as again the Evolution and the Triumph and the Ovation, you will, if you come to class without this component, which is your Serger deck, if you will, or table, what you just brought to class is a serger only machine. You cannot do cover stitch without this. So this is kind of important. Flashing lights, flashing lights. This is important. Flashing lights, flashing lights. Make sure that you bring this with you. This is as important as your power cord or your foot control. Probably even more so, because I might be able to scrounge up the power cord for you. This I probably wouldn't be able to get. So make sure that is in your bag of tricks, guys. Did I strike the fear in you? Yes, I hope. Okay, that's what I aim for. So, in any event, I want to also talk a little bit about Clover Clips. I love Clover Clips. I use them all the time in so many applications. In fact, again, this is as good as Post-it notes. They come in a variety of sizes. This is the most common size. You could use that for binding on quilts, and this is the size I used when I was putting the pillow together. I love the Clover Clips because it does not involve straight pins. Do bring some straight pins with you, but I do want to remind that on our sergers, we do have the cutting blade. And if you happen to hit a pin with your cutting blade, you have just put a nick in it, and more than likely you're going to need to have that replaced. So there are ways to pin parallel to the seam line, which I'll show in class, but I really like the Clover Clips because there is no danger of harming my serger and I get the job done. Notice they come in 3 sizes. These are for larger projects. These are the sizes I recommend for our project when we're with each other for the serged pillow. And these I use with knits when I'm applying bands on knits, etc. I love them. They're a smaller profile. They get right into the corners, really nice. And also 3 different sizes of those Clover Clips. One of the reasons why I decided to do this video, of course, is to welcome you to the class, but I also wanted to show how to cut bias and how to sew the bias into strips. Now, those of you that are quilters, you're going to be in a good space because we do this all day, every day. I know when we do some of our bindings. I will tell you that if you're a garment sewer, there's a lot of applications for bias. The reason why we're using bias strips, and it can't be cross grain cut, guys, it's got to be the bias, is because we've got to go around these corners on the pillow, and the piping will not lay properly unless it's cut on bias. So let me show you how that is done. As you can see here, I've got my salvage edge, and I'm going to back out just a bit so you can see, hopefully. That's about as far as I can go. So hopefully, yeah. I want to go ahead and get rid of this salvage. And so what I can do is I can come up here with my rotary cutter and ruler, and I'm generally supporting the ruler, but also I've got fingers on the fabric itself. So it's Debbie Caffrey, who's a wonderful educator, calls it her modified Spock grip, and I think that's very, very descriptive. So I'm going to come in here, and all I'm doing is I'm just cutting off this salvage because I don't want that in any of my bias. First of all, what is bias? I mean, right now I can tell you this is the salvage edge, so this is on grain. this is the cross grain, and your bias is at a 45 degree. Now notice that I cut off the selvage, so there's not really any way I can tell by the selvage because it's cut off, but I can do it by sound. Let me show you what I mean. If I take, this is again on grain, listen to the sound it makes when I pop the fabric. So it's that type of pitch. Now I'm going to do this now on the cross grain. Listen to the sound. Do you see how it's lower pitched? That lower pitch sound is telling me that there is a little more stretch, and there is a little more stretch in the cross grain. That's why I can use cross grain oftentimes when I do binding on a quilt. This is now at the 45, and listen to the sound this makes. See, it's lower pitched. Again, this is grain. This is cross grain. That's bias. So I want to cut this on the bias because it's going to give me the maximum amount of stretch. And how I'm going to do this is I'm going to take the upper corner here and I'm going to fold it all the way down to meet the bottom edge. And what I have now done is I've created a 45 degree mark here. Now there are many people, and there's nothing wrong with this, to take your ruler, and what you would do is you would cut off that little bit of a fold, and then you would come in here and cut a variety of whatever your widths of strips would be. In our case, for our class, we want 2-inch strips, 2-inch strips, and you could certainly do it just this way. The issue is with larger fabrics, just like this is going off the camera, and unfortunately I can't zoom out further, the rulers sometimes are not long enough. So how you can get this kind of shrunk down in size a little bit is you can go ahead and take this lower corner. Again, this is the 45 degree mark. And I'm going to take this and just fold this back upon itself, just like this. This is still the 45. Let me bring this down so you can see. This is still the 45. It's just now shorter and easier to cut. You want to make sure that there's no gapping in your fold. And some people, what they will do is they'll take their ruler and they'll put that into the fabric and fold against the ruler. It's a way of making sure that all of this fabric here is snugged up. Because what you don't want is unsnugged fabric, because it'll give you strips that look kind of like a V, and that's not what we're after here. Because I can, and to get this more in camera, I'm going to fold this even one more time, straight up like so. And I can stick that in there once again just to make sure everything is snugged up, and it is. So let's get that out of there. Now all it's going to be a matter of doing is you're going to take this and you're going to go ahead and first cut off the very end of, because this is where all the folds are, right? So I like to line up my fabric. Let me bring this down just a bit. I like to line this up. You know, when I'm doing this, guys, I'm doing this at a 45 degree angle. If you could imagine, I'm kind of cutting obscured, and I'm constantly looking up on the monitor to make sure you can see what you need to be seeing. So hopefully this is relatively clear. So I'm going to come over here and I'm going to go ahead and line up my line on my table. This fabric is lined up with that line on the table as well. I'm going to come in here and I'm just going to cut off the very edge of this with my modified spot grip. Thank you for that visual, Debbie. And I'm going to go ahead and cut. Let's make sure I get that all the way. It's hard again to cut off at an angle. So this is now the raw edge, okay? So cut edge. And so what I'm going to do now is I'm going to go ahead and cut these in 2-inch widths. So I've got this lined up here. And guys, if this is bothering you here, you can just fold that up there, because aesthetically, doesn't that just look nicer? I don't know. So I can come up here and I'm going to go ahead and line this up and cut. And again, I'm going to just step in front of you for just a second, because I've got to put my body into that a little bit. And then here's my next 2-inch cut. And you would continue cutting that like so. What this is going to give you is it's going to give you pieces of this bias. It has a lot of stretch to it. the most you can get in a woven fabric, because it's cut on the 45. And what I'm going to do next is I'm going to bring you over to the sewing machine and show you how I sew these strips together, so you'll be all set for class. So be back in a second. Let me just change the views. So this is the Triumph, and one of the reasons why I wanted to show you this is just to remind you the importance of having that Coverstitch deck, if it's applicable, on your machine. Also, because we're doing Coverstitch as well as serging, don't forget your serger deck as well. You need both of these because it's a serger and Coverstitch class. If you are fortunate to have either a Triumph or an Ovation, the foot lift is, knee lift I should say, is also fabulous to have on your machine. And so that's also something to consider bringing. An optional thing that you can choose to get, it depends on how much serging and cover stitching garments that you do. I do a lot myself, so it made sense for me. What I like is this Sew Steady table. The Sew Steady table, although the deck on the Coverstitch machine as it stands now, it's no slouch. But can you imagine? I'm sure you can, because you don't even have to imagine, you can see. What I have here is now all of this extra space here that allows me to support the project when I'm working. So again, Sew Steady tables are also made for your serger, and it does not have to be a dual function machine. If you have a fabulous Enlighten or an Imagine, for instance, the Sew Steady company can absolutely cut one of these tables, one of these acrylic tables for your need as well. So we're back at the sewing machine. I wanted to point out this product. It's called Clearly Perfect Angles. It's by New Leaf Stitching, and I love this product. It is a vinyl sheet that goes onto your sewing machine. You align the needle where the crosshairs are, and it gives you the ability of doing really nice 45-degree stitching and other angles. Something like this is lovely to have on your machine, especially if you're doing a lot of piecing at angles. Because we're going to be stitching this at a 45 when we are putting our strips together. So here's some thoughts. If you don't have something like this and the store can't order it for you in time for the class, what you can certainly do is you can get yourself, I know, a piece of painter's tape. And the piece of painter's tape is going to give you at least one of the angles, and the most important one that we need for today's class. And what you do is you put your painter's tape down in front of the needle, but not covering the feed teeth here. So you want to make sure you avoid the feed teeth. And then what I do is I lower the needle down into the stitch plate, and I'm going to put a ruler up against the needle. And then what I look for is I look at the marks that are on my ruler, and I'm not going to align it up with my table. This has like an insert. It's a beautiful koala insert. Thank you so much, Steve. Love my table. What I will do is I'll look at the sewing machine, and I'm going to line up reference marks on something like maybe the bottom of the stitch plate, which gives me the true parallel with the stitching line, if you will. You could put your foot down to hold this, but I don't find that to be particularly necessary. What I will do is I will hold my ruler in place, and again, it's snugged up against the needle. And then I'll take something like a pen or a Sharpie marker that's fine point, and I simply draw this line. What this line gives me is now the ability to stitch at a 45-degree angle, and let me show you what I mean. These are some of the strips that we cut. And when you cut these, you're going to have like this little angle here. That's just the way it is when you're cutting your little bias strips off. This angle, oftentimes when you're doing this lineup, it sometimes throws people off. Like they start seeing this angle line, and I've had some students, including myself, that says, whoa, this is kind of confusing. Would it be okay if I cut them off? And so all I can say is I could take these guys together like so, and then with my pair of scissors just cut. And so I guess I'm telling you, yes, you can cut those blunt. That'll be fine. When I am sewing the bias strips, it's important that I don't twist the fabric. So what I find that's been helpful to me is I'll take my first piece and I will put it so it's going like down towards the 5 o'clock position, if you will, and then I will take my upper piece, right sides together, and that's going to go up like around the 2 o'clock position. And what I'm looking for is that there is, let's just call this a valley here and here. These two guys here are my valleys, and I want to keep those valleys on this line here, which will allow me to stitch across at that magical 45-degree angle. Now, some of you are not quilters, and some of you have never sewn bias strips together, and some of you might be thinking, well, I'm going to come to class because it just makes more sense for me to cut this like flush and then put it in the machine this way. And I hear you, sisters and brothers, if you're in class, but the issue is this: when you are pressing this open and you are folding this out and then you're putting this on the binding, especially if this gets around like one of the corners of the pillow, there's just too much thickness there. So that's why when we make binding, we generally like to sew this at a 45-degree angle, because then when this is folded or pressed open, let me just kind of put that there, when it's pressed open like this, what's going to happen is the bulk of that seam is distributed along the fabric. I hope that makes sense. It's not as bulky in any one place. So the other thing that you might want to consider is using a thread that kind of blends in a little bit. Doesn't have to be a perfect match, but blends in. And I would set my stitch length to like a 2.0 or a 2.2, which is generally what you would piece anyways at. Generally, if we're sewing clothing, we're like at a 2.5 millimeter. We want this stitch to be a little shorter so that as this fabric is being handled, the seam doesn't tend to want to come open on us. So I'm going to go ahead and line up my two edges like so. Again, right sides are together. The bottom fabric is going at 5 o'clock. The upper fabric is going at 2 o'clock, and I'm looking at the wrong side of the upper fabric. I'm lining this up so that the valleys, the V's, if you will, are on that stitch line. I bring it up to my needle, and I'm going to go ahead and lower my presser foot. Now, all I need to do is go ahead and stitch this, and I'm going to do that right now, just keeping, again, that line right on where that valley or that V is. And then I'm going to stop there so that my presser foot still holds the fabric. This was that second piece. Remember, I put that at a 2 o'clock position. So what I'm going to pretend now is this is a new piece of fabric, and all I'm doing is I'm turning it so that it's laying right side up. It's in the 5 o'clock position. So once again, I'm taking the fabric and I'm just turning it right side up. Notice I'm not spinning this several times. Don't do that. Don't drive yourself nuts. There's enough in life to do that. So again, it's wrong side is up. I just pick it up and I turn it so that the right side is up and it's facing at that magic 5 o'clock. I'm going to take my next strip and I'm going to put it, so this is at the 2 o'clock position, wrong side up, the right sides are together. Lining it up like so, bringing it up to my machine, lining up my V notch with that line, and I'm going to go ahead and sew this next strip. And my eye is down here, it's not at the needle. The needle will take care of itself. I'm stopping so that the presser foot holds the fabric for me. I bring my upper piece, turn it so the right side's up, it's facing the 5 o'clock position. I'm coming over here, this is wrong side up, or as you could say, right sides are together. This is facing the 2 o'clock position. I put it up to my presser foot, I line up my little V, and I'm going to go ahead and stitch this. Then you'll continue doing that for the length of your bias, and believe me, there are many times in my life that I wish I had bias, and so I think the more the merrier. You can save this and use this for other things if you have more than enough. Generally, that fat quarter that I mentioned in the instructions is going to be enough to give you the bias that you need. Notice how all of this is kind of sewn together and it looks kind of, I don't know, interesting. What you can do is just take a pair of scissors and you're just going to go ahead and snip the traveling stitches between the strips and open this up. Notice how I have now that stitched at a 45 degree. What I'm going to do next is I'm going to take this to my iron. I'm going to press this as sewn, and then I'm going to come over here and I'm going to press this open. Some quilters would say, no, press it to one side. I'm not going to get that picky with you. But press as sewn. Again, I like to press it open. It's going to lay flatter. It's going to distribute the weight a little bit more. Press it open. And then you'll come in here once this is all pressed, and you'll simply come in here and just cut off. Let's pretend I pressed that. And you'll just cut off the excess just like this. And you're going to be so ready for class. SEW. Take care, and I look forward to seeing you really soon. Bye for now. And by the way, do drop me an email with any questions. You know, I like to hear from you.